Marketing beyond Tier 2. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Nikki Wang in Shanghai. Most multinationals have mastered marketing in China's most sophisticated cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, known as Tier 1 markets as well as provincial capitals, or Tier 2 cities. Now they're trying to move into China's smaller cities and towns, Tier 3 and 4 markets, but it's a tough transition. There are fewer hypermarkets and more mom-and-pop stores. Distribution often relies on 2 wheels or 4 legs instead of trucks. Consumers also behave differently, which we'll examine this week on Thoughtful China. Plus, our own PT Black will look at what makes second-tier cities worth visiting. But first, with us is Jeffrey Tan, National Research and Insights Director at Starcom MediaVest Group in China. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So your agency has recently completed a research survey called the Yangtze Study that offers insights into Chinese lower-tier consumers. Right. Can you share a little bit about it? Because one of the key points that you mentioned was the role of digital media. What kind of online platforms are they using versus the counterparts in big cities?
Right. Just to give you a bit of background of Yangtze Study, it's one of the largest studies ever done by any advertising agencies. We covered about 510 locations across 27 provinces and interviewed almost 14,000 respondents. So it's a huge amount of research and insights we have there. For digital, I think the main thing they're doing right now is pretty much on chatting, communication, entertainment. They're not so much right now on social media.
Why are they not doing that?
Social media right now is because it's not really calling to the lower tiers yet. When I say lower tiers, I'm talking about Tier 3 to Tier 5, right? So social media like Weibo, Kaixin, Wenwen, they're pretty much still skewed to Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities because that's where the social networks are on. So Tier 3 people right now, they're slowly catching on to Weibo and Kaixin, Wenwen, but they're not really there yet. So I think we're seeing a digital evolution taking place where if more and more people of the network actually come online, then they will actually start to take part in social networks as well.
Okay, so how are advertisers doing online to reach this target audience?
Right now, they're mostly doing through online video. So online video is huge in China, as you know. We actually seen a lot of houses we visited in lower tiers where they don't actually have TV sets at home. So a lot of people are saying that my computer is now my TV, right? So we actually do a lot of online video advertisements, like pre-rolls and let's say the banner ads on those online video websites. Yeah.
For this group of people who, with the attitude of my computer is my TV, what age group are we talking about? Who are these people?
It's mostly skewed towards the younger group, 15 to 29.
Okay. Let's talk about luxury. Do you think luxury is a concept that's understood by these consumers in lower-tier cities?
Right now, we ask that question a lot in the qualitative assessment. It's not as widely understood as we see it in, let's say, Shanghai right now. Luxury for them is very much tied to price. So anything above, let's say, 200 kuai is luxury for them. They don't see it as like Chanel or Cartier or Louis Vuitton. They see it as more like, oh, it's about the cost of something that's really expensive to me. So like I mentioned in my earlier quote, it's actually, luxury is not about the brand of the car, it's about having a car in the first place. Because if you have a car, it means you can afford the petrol to pay for it. So right now the brand awareness of luxury is still not really there yet. But I think it's slowly catching on, especially in lower tier cities.
What can they do? What kind of media channels are they going after to build their brands?
Luxury brands?
Mm-hmm.
I think luxury brands right now, they're still pretty much on the outdoor media space in lower tiers. We see a lot of that in Tier 3 cities like Shijiazhuang, Pengbu. So they're slowly catching on with the outdoor, creating awareness, building prestige in outdoors, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about brand trust, because one of the key points that you mentioned is building trust and building brand stories is really important in reaching these consumers. Right. Can you give me some examples of what successful campaigns that utilize branded content or celebrities to achieve that?
Right. Brand trust is very important because, first of all, lower tier people, they don't trust advertising so much. They trust people, right? So you need word of mouth to really build that kind of traction with you. So it's really about making sure that people around you are familiar with the brand, that they trust the brand.
How about celebrities? Are they an effective way in reaching these consumers?
Celebrities are important as well. We see because celebrities, for them, are kind of like a trust factor. So they trust them as friends. Mm-hmm. So celebrities like, let's say, Jackie Chan, Jay Chou, they're still very popular in lower tiers. They know about them. Increasingly, we also see like Western celebrities being very popular as well.
So if there is one thing that marketers need to know about these lower tier consumers, what would it be?
I think the biggest misconception is that lower tier doesn't mean low taste, right? It doesn't mean that we need to think of them in a different way, like we need to give them products which are like something which is rejected by tier one. I think the important thing is to understand what their needs are, what are the motivations in lower tier consumers, because their motivations, aspirations, life are very different from ours. So it's about respecting their need and understanding how brands can actually fit into that need that they have.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Now we'll hear a thought or two from PT Black about what makes lower tier cities worth visiting.
These days, China's economic excitement is in its smaller markets. Third and fourth tier cities are booming, brought closer by new highways, airports, and of course the internet. So what does it mean for you? Here are my 3 C's for lower tier marketing. First C is cost. Yes, lower tier cities have more available wealth than in the past, but that doesn't mean people are going to spend it. Lower tier markets are accustomed to low prices, so be prepared to compete with the cheapest. Second is culture. China has over 150 cities with 1 million people, and each one is unique. Don't rely on stereotypes, and keep an eye on changing attitudes, especially towards money, health, women, and leisure. The final C is context. That's the background brand awareness we use to make choices. It's developed over time through multiple sources. First-tier cities have solid brand contexts. Shoppers know the difference between Hugo Boss and Bossini, but not so in third and fourth tier. The market is a jumble of local brands and knockoffs. It's hard to know what's what. So that's where celebrities come in. Forget uniqueness. Their primary role is to bring context to a brand. Your noodle ads have a top Hong Kong star? Must be a top brand. But the most important element is retail. Simple, durable point-of-sales material makes good sense for mom-and-pop kiosks. Retail brands also build context by clustering with peers and even competitors. But when all else fails, my last piece of advice, find the nearest KFC.
Thanks, PT. With us now is Tim Schlick, Head of Strategic Planning in Greater China for DDB Group, Kunal Sinha, Chief Knowledge Officer for Ogilvy and Mather, and Viveka Chen, Chairman and CEO of We Marketing Group. We're talking about marketing in Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities in China. What's the first thing that you notice when you travel there?
Okay, overall, you feel it's darker. You feel it's less clean, it's more dirty. The people dress a little bit differently. Usually they're more casual, but very often they dress for the wrong occasion. So in other words, they always dress like sports wear for business occasion, maybe leather shoes to go on a trip, you know, like the reverse. Yeah. So they don't have that kind of dressing code. But then what is very interesting is there's always this wow. Because third and fourth tier city can be very, very different. And you suddenly have this really old place, and then suddenly you find this, you know, area where it's the really new buildings and maybe a copy of, you know, the water cube or whatever. But wow, you know, why is it this place like in the middle of nowhere, something very, very different? And that's because there's a lot of change going on, a lot of construction and new development going on. So I think it's interesting as, you know, kind of this old and new juxtaposition, but you always get this surprise wow effect.
Do you see a massive drop in product prices? Do you see, you know, less sophisticated consumers?
I think yes, there is certainly the kind of brands that are available at the price points are definitely lower, because as we know, the income levels of people in Tier 3 and Tier 4 are definitely lower. But what is the most interesting thing is that availability of brands is no longer dictated by just physical retail presence. A lot of people in Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities are buying things online, they're buying things on Taobao, and that is somehow changing the entire spectrum of what people can buy and where they can buy things.
How are the consumers reacting to this change? Do they see themselves as the poor cousin to big city counterparts?
Not at all. It's actually, if you ask consumers in lower tier markets, when it comes to fashion, for example, they will regard themselves just as fashionable as upper tier people. It's just that they have a different comprehension of that.
I think that you see there's a really great diversity. On one hand, sometimes the fourth tier city is just right next to really rural village. It's really a very small division. So there's a lot of really poor people, but on the other hand, there's a lot of very rich people. So, you know, they don't look like they're very rich, but that you can really underestimate their spending power.
For lower-tier consumers, what's most important to them when it comes to brands? What are they looking for in brands?
Well, what we observe is that in lower-tier cities, people all over China, consumers spend a lot of time in finding out the best value. And this value is constituted by many things. It could be the best price, it could be the best quality, it could be what product gives me or what brand gives me the best face. And lower-tier consumers tend to go the extra mile and really find out what brand does give you the best deal and what gives you the best value. And it doesn't really matter much if it's a local brand or international brand. As long as you're in that set and you're relevant, as you were saying, and you have built affinity, the brand that gives you the most value will be the brand that succeeds.
And one of the really interesting things is that people, even though they might be living in small towns, want new things. They want, new ways of living, new ways of connecting with other people. So novelty, anything that is new, is certainly going to be a big draw. Now, we all agree that simply because people have lower incomes, they would like to have those things, perhaps at lower prices. So that is given. But I think the other interesting thing is that lower-tier consumers are now beginning to believe that they have collective bargaining power. And phenomena like Tuanggo becomes an outlet for them to actually exercise their bargaining power. And that is, I think, something significant that's going to change the dynamics of how people are going to buy in the future. Because, again, as I mentioned, status is both in some ways desirable, but it is also alienating. And we know that, in the lower tier, the income disparities are far greater than they are in the bigger cities, where it is a sort of a gradual thing. So there are the successful businessmen, but there is also, for people who haven't quite made it, or who are, the feeling that some of the most successful people are perhaps haven't made it the right way. So there's a sort of an envy as well as some sort of a fear that that may not be exactly the right way. So as we've all been saying, it's important to look at or understand that it's not going to be exactly the same way. Every lower tier city is not necessarily the same as the other lower tier city. It will change by the kind of employment opportunities that are there, because there might be bases for large companies. It might be because of proximity either to a village or to a big town, which might dictate the way consumers behave.
I think the biggest difference is that the third and fourth tier cities are by nature, because they're smaller, so people are much closer together. So they are more community-like in their behavior. Whereas in bigger cities, particularly in Shenzhen, everybody's transient. So, it's like you don't know each other, and people are not very close. So in a more closed place, the behavior is different. For example, rather than shopping in chains, they like to go to the neighborhood store because they know that person, they can trust that person. So even like Suning, for example, they may be better in second-tier cities or first-tier cities, but not actually in the third. So there's always this mom-and-pop store that will do very well because it's all about relationships.
I think on that note, what's also important in the low-tier markets, it has a lot to do with exposure and availability, especially when it comes to brands when it comes to Western brands. In Shanghai, you have stores pretty much every brand that's around. In lower tier cities, you don't have that. And if you ask people in lower tier cities, what brands are you trusting? And very often people say, yeah, I trust Chinese brands. And when you ask deeper, you find out, okay, actually it's a Western brand, but they didn't realize it was a Western brand because it had a translation into Chinese, and which all comes back to availability and exposure. When you're not exposed to 1,000 shops for the brand, you have a different perception of that.
If you visit a supermarket or a hypermarket in a third tier or fourth tier town, you would still have 40 brands of shampoo. The only difference would be that in Shanghai or Beijing, 30 of those brands would be multinational or brands, whereas in the lower tier, you would find a whole lot of regional brands, a whole lot of local brands, whose names you would have never heard of, but they would all be there. So the choices that people have are somewhat different, and which is also a good thing, because people are constantly saying that we want choices. We want the same kinds of choices that consumers in the big city have, except that the choices that are made available to them are perhaps slightly different.
Yeah, and in terms of brand building, on that note, of course it's very complex to do through the tier marketing in China. At the same time, on some levels, it's actually very easy because for lower tiers, for lower tier consumers, brand advertising, or the fact that you're doing brand advertising, is actually brand building, because people take a look at a brand on TV and say, oh, wait a minute, if this brand is able to afford advertising on CCTV, I trust this brand because it must be good.
What do you think marketers really underestimate about this group of consumers?
I think underestimate their change, because this thing about lessons learned usually do not work, because you learn something that worked and then you can repeat it, it's already moved on. And I think the third and fourth are moving on very quickly. The consumer expectations move very quickly.
Tim, Viveka, Kunal, thank you for being on the show. Now this wraps it up for us today. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and Tudor. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter. We'll see you again.